The Quran goes on and on about Bnei Israel who are indigenous to the land. Were bombarded by this propaganda and by modern day libels. Some were repeated by former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who died not of old age thanks to the Israeli Air Force, who used to quote the Quran, the Hadith, such nonsense.
And I really believe that Israel's legitimacy should never be questioned. If you have a problem with this government or that government, I understand. But this is the trick that many anti-Zionist people do. Our problem is with this government. No, it's not. Your problem is with the legitimacy of Israel. And of course, Israel deserves to be envied. Let's be honest. A country of the size of New Jersey gave the world cherry tomatoes, Waze, USB, Philicam, high-tech. Of course, it should be envied.
As you see, we all have roots in this so-called Muslim or Arab world, not Iran. Iran was only Islamized, not Arabized. The problem, the Arab-Israeli conflict, is mostly religious, something people do not realize. It is religious today. There is a narrative circulating, especially in the West, that it's a political issue that gets resolved once you give the Palestinians a Palestinian state. What people do not understand is how deep and complex the issue is. It's a matter of Islamizing what was un-Islamized. After October 7, when Antonio Guterres said October 7 did not happen in a vacuum, I totally agree with him. I disagree that it started in 1948. This is not the root cause of the problem. It started a little earlier when a genius leader, and I'm not saying genius to praise him, but he was very smart, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, realized that the Zionists are more organized than the Arabs will ever be. And the problem with the Zionists, if it continues to be a political one, will inevitably, eventually be resolved. Therefore, it has to become a religious conflict that will never end short of the elimination of one side. And who is going to be eliminated? The smaller group. Therefore, back in the 20s, Hajj Amin Husseini sent emissaries around the world to tell Muslims that we need to renovate the Temple Mount. This site, the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa, needs to be renovated. We will be at the spearhead of this fight, but you need to give us money. So the site was renovated and they poured gold on the dome. This is a glimpse, and I think the other panelists can add many layers to what I just shared with you.
I always love to go back to the roots. I am a proud Arab and a Muslim, and I'm a proud supporter of Israel and Zionism. And I love to challenge my Muslim friends when I speak about that. I love to remind them that I was in their shoes once. I was on the other side of the river. I memorized the Quran at the age of 17. I know the Quran inside out. And I love to go to the roots. And I always tell my friends that if you look at the roots of things, the Quran, when it comes to our holy book, yes, it criticizes the Jews in so many verses. But what Muslims don't tell you that it says as well that the Jews were the chosen. But when you say this to a Muslim, that the Jews were the chosen people, yeah, these were the old Jews. But when it comes to criticism, this is all Jews. And the thing that people don't understand is that my favorite Zionist of all time is mentioned in the Quran. And the Quran praised him. Not only praised him, but the verse that the Quran praised him, Hamas took it for October 7, and they quoted that verse. You know who my favorite Zionist of all time is? Joshua bin Nun, Yehoshua ibn Nun. Joshua and Caleb were the only two spies from the 12 spies of Israel who insisted that they should take the land. Other 10 spies, they said, no, there are the Jebusites, the Canaanites, the Philistines in their 5 strongholds, Ashdod, Ashqalon, Gaza, Gat, and Aqron. We cannot take them. Joshua and Caleb said, we should take them. And this is why God, our creator, that we believe in, honored Joshua and Caleb and made them see through it, and they enter the land with the second generation. I keep reminding my Muslim friends that Prophet Muhammad died 632 AD. That year, he did something called Hajjat al-Wada', the final pilgrimage. And in that final pilgrimage, a verse in the Quran says, today I perfected the religion for you. That means that this is Islam should be concealed on in 632. 632, the land of Israel or the Palestine was under whose control? The Byzantine Empire. It was not under a Muslim empire. The two holy mosques are our mosques, but Jerusalem was never there. Jerusalem surfaced only when Richard of England and Philip of France decided to do a crusade, and then suddenly people realized, oh, there is a place where Muslims live, because you know how many followers of the Prophet Muhammad visited Jerusalem? Companions of the Prophet Muhammad when he died were 100,000 people. 26 of them visited Jerusalem. In our school of thoughts, Sunni, and also the Shiite school of thought, Jerusalem is never there. Many clerks of old Islam, when they talked about which important mosques that we have here or there, they were praising the mosques of Iraq because the family of the Prophet settled there. I keep reminding my Muslim friends of these facts as someone who was on the other side and who was so indoctrinated with lots of hate. But when I opened my eyes, I realized the problem is with Islamic anti-Semitism. It comes from some texts, yes, some texts that are attributed to Prophet Muhammad and they are not in the Quran, that I don't believe in, like the Jew will hide behind the tree at the end of days. I conquer this and saying, well, you believe this will happen in Islam, according to us, when Jesus comes back. What if a tree says, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him, and that Jew turned out to be Jesus? So this is also problematic. And by the way, I always say this to my Christian friends as well, because there is also a Christian anti-Semitism that affected the Muslim anti-Semitism, because the protocols of the elders of Zion were brought from the West. Right. And I keep reminding the Christians, especially the Arab Christians who are so anti-Zionist, please read Jesus's words. Dig deep into what Jesus said. And I keep saying this. I don't mean to make it a joke, but I say if you dig deep in what Jesus said, Jesus was a hardcore Likudi. Really, I'll give you some examples. Jesus called the land of Israel. Jesus, when he wanted to praise his disciples, he called them, you are a true Israelite, in you there is no deceit. Jesus called the part of the land, Yehuda v'Shimron, Judea and Samaria, that people are disputing. No, it should be called the West Bank. West of what? So, and Jesus was also a proud Jewish who were called by his disciples the King of Israel. This is why the Romans mocked him and called him the King of Jews. So a Muslim who would say, I believe in Jesus, but Jesus was Palestinian, I say, with all due respect to all the Palestinians around the world, and I love them so much, you don't know what Jesus said, or you don't know his faith or his background or his belief. Islam anti-Semitism comes from the fact that many Muslims decide not to connect the dots and not to use their brains in knowing that Israel is legitimate because the prophets, kings, and heroes that many of us are named after, they come from that portion of the land that they call the land of Israel. And I want to conclude with one thing, one final thing. I want to conclude with, okay, so why is the hate, the Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam? Yeah, this came later, and this is part of radical Islam. I believe so, and I agree with that. But also it comes from the fact that many Muslim scholars believe that Jews and Christians shouldn't be dominant. They always should be second class. Yes. So the idea that they are dominant, not only dominant and successful, that's a big kill to us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Incredible. So we've now talked about this kind of Islamic soil. Now let's talk about the injections that came from the outside. You mentioned the Mufti that went and saw Hitler. So there was a National Socialism propaganda system that gave it an infusion. You spoke of the protocols of the Elders of Zion that came from Tsarist Russia, which is the basis of the entire conspiracy view of Zionism to this day that we see, American social media influencers. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this infusion of propaganda from the Nazis, from the Soviets into the Islamic world, and how that continued to gear Islamic thought towards anti-Zionism.
I became a public speaker after October 7th. When I speak in Israel, I tell them I used to be one of Hezbollah's biggest fans. I hated the Israelis, the Zionists, and the Jews, and I repeat the three terms because in the Arab world, we do not make a distinction between the three. That's a farce. And I tell them, believe you me, if you were in my shoes, you would hate the Jews as well. Why? Because we are intensively indoctrinated. What shocks me is that many people do not understand the extent of this indoctrination and were surprised when the IDF told them we found Mein Kampf in Gaza. There are stores named after Hitler in the Gaza Strip and the so-called West Bank. So today, instead of always sharing with people, I got you something on my way from Israel. I stopped in Germany at home and I got you something to show you my version of Mein Kampf, of Hitler's Mein Kampf, that I bought for less than $1 in Damascus. What is interesting about it, as I live in Germany and have neo-Nazi friends, I wasn't aware when I befriended them. And I compared this Mein Kampf to the original one. I understood why the Arabs did not know how much the Nazis liked them. That was left out. I got you 3 books. One is my copy of Kifahi, or Mein Kampf. It was printed in Beirut. First edition in 1963, second edition in 1995. The guy who translated it, I looked for him for years. He's called Loay Alshareef, so he's given a Christian name. Copyright Dar Sadr. This was published in Beirut, in liberal, civilized Lebanon. And here, just one line that I'm going to share with you from the intro. It says, Adolf Hitler was not only for the German people. He's one of the few greatest who almost changed the trajectory of history. Beirut. My friend is a historian, Austrian historian, but he's a good guy. He likes the Jews. He got me the Protocols of the Elders of Zion from Cairo. He bought it for less than $1. The beginning of the book, it says on the agenda in the intro, that part of the agenda of the Jews is to take over the world and to spread chaos, pornography, and it spreads distorted religions, whatever that means. This was printed in Damascus. This is unbelievable. No, sorry. This one is printed in Cairo, Dar Safa. If you use it for social media, we're just shaming them. And lastly, there is a guy who lives in Toronto who has the biggest collection in the world, the biggest Herzl collection, David Matlow. Apologies if I'm pronouncing the last name wrong. This is a very interesting book from his collection, and it's on Theodor Herzl. This was printed in Damascus, and he bought it from someone in Cairo. And on it, it says Theodor Herzl, Shaitan al-Suhiyuniya, Satan of Zionism, and Iblis al-Asr al-Hadith. What is Iblis in English? The devil of modern history. Those books are treated sometimes even by academics as serious literature. In year 2000, Syrian drama produced a series titled The Diaspora, Al-Shatat. You can find it on YouTube, and if they ever removed it, we downloaded the whole thing. Stars of the Syrian media played in this series. It starts with the Rothschilds and how the father, before dying, told the sons to control the world. But it portrays Theodor Herzl as the devil. He's a pimp. I kid you not. His girlfriend, called Jeanne, runs a brothel in Paris. And whenever he wants a favor from a politician, he sends the politicians to Jeanne. It's insane, the level of madness about the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Dreyfus affair. It was aired in Lebanon for a few days, and then the American embassy had to protest. No. Then it aired in Jordan, and guess where else? In Iran. This is insane. We grow up with this. In Lebanon, although I attended a French Catholic school, one of the best until this day, it's not an UNRWA school. Around the age we were 12 or 13, we had one history lesson, the story of Palestine, 3 pages. The antagonist was Theodor Herzl, who invented something called Zionism. And according to Herzl, the Jews, who obviously originate in Eastern Europe, were going to come to our Middle East, take Palestine. We learned the date and the content of the Balfour Declaration. We learned the date of the First Zionist Congress in Basel, and that implied that the West enabled the Zionist project. And you hated them after that with such a passion, especially that there were no Jews left among us to contest whatever we are told about them. This nonsense, and today I call it nonsense, as if I made a discovery. The moment you start using your brain, you realize they came from Eastern Europe, but your Bible says, or even better, the Quran goes on and on about Bnei Israel who are indigenous to the land. We were bombarded by this propaganda and by modern-day libels. Some were repeated by former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who died not of old age thanks to the Israeli Air Force, who used to quote the Quran, the Hadith, such nonsense, but also Ha'aretz, our enemies from within, who should be expelled as Yallah from the country if they hate it so much. I'm just saying, and I think my colleagues can continue.
Yes.
Just imagine being bombarded with this. What would you think about the Jew?
Yes.
It seems that people seem to forget where the word Jew comes from. This itself debunks the idea that Jews are foreign colonialists in their ancestral homeland. By the way, before 586 BCE, none of your ancestors were called Jews. They were called Israelites or Hebrews. There is a prophet that we love in Islam. His name is Yunus, which comes from the Greek Ionas, in Hebrew Yonah, which means a dove. You know, when he was caught on a boat, when the people were trying to throw him because there was like some sort of like turbulence in the sea, they said, "Who are you?" He said, "Ivri Anochi. I'm only a Hebrew." After 586 BCE, what happened? When the Babylonians inquired about the origins of those people that suddenly bombarded their new land by Nebuchadnezzar, they said, "Where you guys come from?" They said, "We come from Judea. We are the Jews." Why were they called Jews? Because they settled in the land that was partitioned by my favorite Zionist of all time, Joshua. And that portion of the land was named after the fourth son of Jacob, Yehuda. This is why they were called Yehud. And also, by the way, I want to add something to what Abraham said. People who are just, defining you're not Jewish or you're coming from there. Also, we have some friendly Jews that I always call Zionists in the waiting Jews, who call themselves Natori Karta. Natori Karta, I confronted them and I told them, please tell people the truth. Tell the Palestinians the truth that you are also Zionists, but you're just waiting for the Messiah. So you are Zionists in the waiting. And I always tell them that. And the difference between you and I, as a Muslim who is a Zionist, is that because I believe that God gave the land to the children of Israel. And by the way, I just want to say something, Ibrahim. It's conditional. I believe even today it's conditional. If Israelis do not feel Zionist enough, they don't deserve the land. And I say this because I see so many leftists and so many people, even in the West, especially with this crazy marriage between the left and the radical Islamists coming together, demonizing Jews and demonizing Zionists. I believe we have to do lots of education in the Arab world, because Rawan's book, Chronicles of the Elder Zion, was one of the books.
It's not my. I own the book. I did not write the book.
Great author, Rawan.
The book that Rawan quoted, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, was also one of my favorite childhood books, because,
Wow.
there's a very big Arab TV series. It's an Egyptian TV series. And, my family is Saudi family, but also Egyptian family. We are half Saudi, half Egyptian. There was a big Egyptian TV show called A Night Without a Horse. Please look it up on YouTube. A Night with a K Without a Horse. It takes part of the story that happened in Egypt, that the English invaded Egypt. Yeah, we all know that. The English came to Egypt. But you don't know who was behind that. The Zionists. And the opening scene is that Zionists are conspiring around one table saying that we should conquer Egypt and we should go back to the land of Egypt. So education is so important. But also I want to say one thing to my Jewish friends. I sometimes blame some Jews. You know why? Because with all due respect, they are not knowledgeable enough when it comes to, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend, of course, not knowledgeable enough when it comes to the Islamic culture or the Arab culture and how Zionists, true educated Muslims who have brains should be. And two, someone like Moshe Dayan, who was a brilliant, brilliant military leader. He gave up Temple Mount to those who took it as a gesture of good faith. And now we have the situation where Al Jazeera calling Jews going to the holiest site that they have, storming Temple Mount. I need to remind Muslims that when you call Jews storming their holiest site, that the word for Quds that started in Islam, it came from a Jewish terminology. Bayt al-Maqdis comes from Bayt HaMikdash, which is the Jewish temple. This is why there is an Egyptian jihadist terrorist organization in Sinai. It's called Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, the allies of Bayt al-Maqdis. I always say, Wallah, guys, you should make amends with Israel because you want to destroy Israel, but you are called literally the allies of the Jewish temple. So it doesn't add up. Education is so important. And I believe I changed through education, and I changed through going to the roots. And I really believe that Israel's legitimacy should never be questioned. If you have a problem with this government or that government, I understand. But this is a trick that many anti-Zionist people do. Our problem is with this government. No, it's not. Your problem is with the legitimacy of Israel. And of course, Israel deserves to be envied. Let's be honest. A country of the size of New Jersey gave the world cherry tomatoes, Waze, USB, Philicam, high tech. Of course, it should be envied.
Well said. You know, that very interesting conversation is layers and layers of thought that has come together. I wonder sometimes in my own silence whether the two projects, the one that is from the Hebrew Bible, the civilizational project that emanated out of the Hebrew Bible, the covenantal system, the idea of a Mashiach.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt.
Yes.
I really have to interrupt very quick.
Please.
Hebrew Bible is so important in our lives that we don't really connect the dots. I went to the Michael movie 4 times, and I spoke to a Saudi friend of mine. I told him, you know, the name Michael is so beautiful that it has no other meaning but in Hebrew. He said, Loay, come on, stop this Zionist thing. Connecting. I said, Michael means Mikael, who is like God. And it's only in Hebrew. And it's a beautiful name. We have to know that the Bible is one of the greatest blessings that we have on this earth.
Exactly. That's a very good point. And that's where I was going with the question. When you look at the civilizational construct that emanates out of the Hebrew Bible, fundamentally, I find that, well, if the world is to go towards the universalism of Islam, for instance, there is a fundamental DNA conflict beyond ideology, beyond schools of thought. These are not two visions. They're two different visions. Now, I know that Loay often speaks from the Hebrew Bible to the Arab people because it is a deeply, religious society. It responds better to what may be the word of God rather than the thoughts of Herzl. And I have tried that with a lot of Islamists in Iran, and I find that it worked very well. Do you guys think that if more people in the Muslim world heard and understood the Jewish perspective about Zionism and the land of Israel from the point of view of the Hebrew Bible, not that they would convert, but at least they might have a certain innate sense of respect because they respect the things of God, would that be one way to approach the conversation with the Muslim world from a biblical Zionist point of view?
How would you like to introduce any argument coming from Israel or from the Jewish perspective? The Israeli and Jewish perspectives are omitted in the Arab world. What I mean is, after 1948, when Arab countries tried to destroy Israel and failed, they introduced a strategy, boycotting Israel. How? They introduced and embedded in their constitutions and basic laws anti-normalization laws and policies forbidding people-to-people contact between the citizens of those countries and Israelis, even abroad. An example, a Lebanese, a Kuwaiti, an Iraqi, and Algerian meet an Israeli in Canada or in Australia in a pub at university. They are not allowed to speak to them. Why is that? Why are you not allowed even to ask them, why don't you give the land back to the Palestinians?
Perfect. 1 to 2 minute final thoughts. Go ahead, Abraham.
Very quick. Yes, it should be. And by the way, I want to say one thing very, very, very quickly. Yasser Arafat, he said that he refused to sign the deal with Ehud Barak in 2000 because he said to President Clinton, Mr. President, I don't believe there was a Jewish temple. And those who say, well, it's in the Bible, it's in your point of view. Yes, but also the Bible has to be combined with archaeology and history. And I wish any Italian ambassador in the world, to those who deny the Jews had temple, to take them on a free ticket to Rome, to go to the Colosseum next to it. There's an Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus has Roman soldiers carrying the menorah. Where does that menorah come from? It comes from the Beit HaMikdash, the Jewish temple. How could President Arafat say, I don't believe there was of course you should. And this is why it's so important to have this education, biblical knowledge, historical, and archaeology. They all go together. In the Museum of Amman, Jordan, there is a tablet of a king of Moab. His name is Mesha. A Jordanian friend, he said, Loay, my grandma is older than Israel. I tell him, okay, let's read the Mesha Stela, talking about how he lost lands to King Umri, the king of Israel. And I told him, Amir, I don't really believe if your mom or if your grandma is older than King Umri or King of Israel in the Mesha Stela. It's so important to have this kind of education.
I saw that. On your social media.
I met last week in Israel a lady in Nahariya whose family was murdered by a Lebanese Druze terrorist in 1979 who infiltrated the borders by sea and joined an armed Palestinian faction. This guy was called Samir Kuntar. He was released from Israeli prisons in 2008 thanks to a deal that Hezbollah brokered with Israel. That guy took her husband and her daughter, who's 4 years old, shot her husband in front of eyewitnesses, smashed the skull of her 4-year-old with a rock. When he was released in 2000, Al Jazeera threw him a birthday party live on TV. I remember children waving flags, celebrating him. Hassan Nasrallah went on stage, risked his life to celebrate Samir Kuntar. Thanks to social media, these guys and myself can speak to the Arab world. This is how Abraham can have the conversation. Thanks to social media, after I met this lady whose family was massacred, we had a space on X. 1,200 Lebanese and Israelis joined. And I told the organizers, I'm going to ask a question, and if somebody knows the answer, please give them the mic. I asked the Lebanese, do you remember Samir Kuntar? Yes. Do you know what he's done? They said no. Let me tell you, when I told them, grown men, professional men were crying, ashamed of themselves, because we celebrated monstrosity. We were brainwashed. And people are waking up thanks to social media. There are prospects of peace. It'll be fine, Bezrat Hashem.
Loay, I don't see a cane pulling me off. So, Loay, 1 minute, one question for you. In 1 minute, the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is a branch, what is their beef with Israel? I understand the Iranian perspective was we destroy Israel, the Mahdi arrives, Islam becomes the religion. But what is the Muslim Brotherhood's perspective? What's their strategy?
The Muslim Brotherhood's perspective and strategy and their beef with Israel is comes from that they really want to dominate and they see Israel as an obstacle. Exactly the same way as the terrorist Islamic regime of Iran, not the Iranian people. The Islamic regime of Iran sees Israel. They don't see Israel. They see Israel as a deterrence to their real expansion. They are the real expansionists, those radicals. Take it from someone who knows them so well. Israel is not a real expansionist. How could an expansionist state like Israel give away 60,000 square kilometers to Egypt for peace if it was expansionist? They're not doing a good. And I want to say that the greatest achievement in American foreign diplomacy is the Abraham Accords. It will expand. And inshallah, we will do our best for more peace in the region because this is what would make Abraham proud.
Yes, amen.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this. You can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.